I guess I've never really thought of my practice as a London-based practice, interestingly enough. But in so many ways, London, or at least the Greater London, is where I really kind of started to focus my attention on what my way of creating potentially is. And London's been, I guess, a research base for many years, interestingly enough, I guess, although in pockets, very small pockets. But in terms of, as a student, it was a place where I sort of dissected and took apart, and I found it to always be really rich in its complexity, but also in its kind of eccentricities. Mm-hmm. And I always found sort of London really odd, because every time you turn a corner, everything completely changes, you know? And that's so rare for, I think, a city in the world. So I think London's very unique in that way. And so I think it drives inspiration and imagination, like as a place to be, especially as a cyclist or as a walker. Like, you get to know it quite intimately, and you have encounters or situations that it constantly varied. So as a city or an urban kind of fabric as a whole, I just think it's really fascinating, London as a city, and I think it kind of can always give back so much. And there's so much coming into play constantly. There's so many things to see. There's so much, well, there used to be anyway, actually starting to, I think, dilute a little bit. But at least when I first moved here about nearly 20 years ago, like, I think there was just such a richness in the messiness of the city. And I've seen it slowly cleanse away, and that's starting to kind of maybe reduce my relationship with it somehow, or kind of want or need to kind of find some dynamic within it, and that maybe helps in some ways kind of drive opportunity, or kind of like ways to kind of induce action on it. Yeah. So I feel like there's a constant agency with and from, like there's an activity that happens.
But it's interesting that your first instinctive response was to say that you don't really see yourself as a London architect, London practice. Is there something about the city that makes you think in that way? You know, it's an international city, it's a place where cultures meet, and so I wonder whether there is something about the city that makes you think more broadly.
Yeah, I think London's such a transient place. Like, people come, people go. It's quite rare that you stay long term, or you find yourself staying. No, but I came to it with the longing of wanting to be amongst others who were from other places. You know, this kind of, it felt like a place where you could be and belong, even though you had this kind of sense of being an outsider somehow. And I think London accepts you for that, which is an incredible thing to find, I think, with this. I mean, often what happens now within larger cities. But as a melting pot, I think it's quite hard to think of yourself as a Londoner. Like, it feels like a non-thing somehow. Because there's always potential that you might leave, potentially, no? Or a sense that something might change within the city that yeah, and I think that uncertainty and that discomfort is quite interesting creatively. Mm-hmm. It allows you to kind of really push as much as you can in a specific amount and learn from it.
I mean, certainly a lot of people from our generation, because we studied together at the IA, have left. There is something interesting in that. Sometimes you come to London to study, to begin learning, to start thinking about practice, but then the city in some way also serves as a space that some will leave and some will come back. Like, new people will come and some people will leave. Do you, so kind of in architectural terms, I mean, you say you learned from encounters. There's a kind of urban fabric that also in some ways it's quite inspiring. I wonder if your projects that deal with London are actually responses to London, or what do they respond to?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, the work I've done or do responds to site very specifically. It responds to environments, to the fabric that it sits within. It responds to the kind of the larger socio-economical kind of state of the place. So in that sense, yes, of course, the work is intrinsically supported by its site, which is London so often. Not always, but so often London. And I think within that, like, what is that? Yeah, I think I'm finding the unexpected or the grittiness within those sites, or the kind of longing for something potentially that feels like it's always been, to kind of find its way in being and in sitting, potentially either short term or long term, depending on the project. So I think, yeah, I mean, like in any other site, I think the site feeds the work so much in the way that I even think about the start of a project, or even like how it then continues in the process towards the end.
Yes, but I guess there's still also an element of something that you bring in. So of course there is site in every project, but there's also something that you bring into the project that isn't there. And I guess maybe that's where the value is in our profession, is that there is there is something novel or a different way of thinking that we bring. And therefore the site also then, or like the project becomes a kind of negotiation between the site and something else. Where did those things come from that you bring, or what do you bring? How do you articulate that thing that you bring?
That archive that you carry on within yourself, like from all of your experiences, and I guess and I don't think that isn't necessarily just place. That is from the beginnings of your first creative moments, or at least your nurtured or intrinsic moments, all the way to through your education to practice. And specifically, I think growing up in many different places and not having a settled home as such, as it's slightly in a nomadic sort of sense of constantly moving, constantly being placed into unknown situations, unknown places, and then like sitting within that as an outsider. I think that those were really valuable. Like they were really kind of not only to see the different cultures, but also to find myself in different ways, was a really valuable start, I think, to becoming quite internal in the way I trusted my instincts, or I trusted my own approach. And then doing fine art before architecture, I think, had a huge sway into how I see potentially the work I do. So I think sitting for 4 years doing fine art at university level, and having that space to just kind of philosophize, question, like the freedom in so many ways, not the freedom of just exploring yourself and ideas and values of how you see the world through different mediums, was extremely valuable to I think how I see space, or how I feel I can maybe give back, or like approach how we live. So architecture actually like creates a rigidity in that somehow. Like it brings rigor, it brings structure, it brings somehow an approach and a framework, but it also removes, I think, a lot of that lightness that you get with art. And I think that now, looking back, and I think a lot of the work that I've done, like I start to realize that I'm trying to find that freedom again, like through the work that I consider usually quite sculptural rather than architectural even.
Your work, current work.
Yeah, I think of it as sort of maybe a series of installations that are curated rather than necessarily, I don't think of it necessarily as design often. And I think that relationship to kind of finding, like a looseness in something, or like this idea of a sketch being continuously changing and nothing quite fixed, provides, I think, that freedom back to what I seek. But the site does initiate a lot of that. You know, the site is kind of the starting point that then feeds kind of references or how you might translate it. And so yeah, I do love working with kind of what comes out, like what intuitively comes out, and then obviously through references, through maybe conversations, like all of those things then start to feed, and testing starts to become, I guess, the starting point for maybe what could come, but without too much of an end, basically.
Mm-hmm. So there is a sensibility to your approach to the project, and that sensibility comes from the way that you've grown up and this sense of space being almost fluid or ever-changing, and then maybe art as, you know, as a field which operates differently to architecture. So I think, but then what's interesting in what you've said is that those are operational things, or they frame your sensibility, your attitude. But I wonder in terms of formal ideas, like ideas of how spaces are constructed and a sense of style. I recognize a certain minimalism in your work, and I don't know if you're actually in dialogue with a minimalist artistic tradition. Are there other influences that you're in dialogue with? How do you see yourself in relation to what you're exploring?
Yeah, I find that quite a tricky one. I guess I don't feel that. I think it's a question I can maybe start answering in another 20 or 30 years, looking back. But initially, maybe as a kind of like starting point, yes, I have an aesthetic approach potentially, or a preference, or and that's very much drawn from my art references, or from at least the work that I was producing in fine art, which I think is down to how can we reduce, I think, reduce or edit while still being complex. And so within that, whether that's minimalism, I'm not sure, but it definitely is kind of a search for the simplicity with complexity. Like, so the simple, but yet that has intrinsic meaning and depth to it. And I think that is my constant drive to remove. I think I've come from a family of ornamentation and of like a lot of stuff, no, like a kind of a need to carry the past with you. And I think that that's something that I've learned through travels to slowly let go. Like, and I feel that comes through in the aesthetics. Like, actually, how can we reduce and how can we find the meaning in the clarity that we want? And I think that comes through in aesthetics, not necessarily just for functionalism, but through clarity, I think.
Well, clarity is an interesting word because in a way it doesn't really imply it doesn't imply a style, but actually implies it implies kind of on a level of an idea that something is just clear. And so if its manifestation is something very simple, then that's what it is.
Yeah, I think I don't have an outcome in sight. Like, I wouldn't be able to put together a kind of a set of images of what it will be until it's progressed, and then it becomes that. Like, I think I find that the image comes through testing and trying, and then it just becomes clear that that's what's right. So it's very intuitive. I don't think it's not formally determined in so many ways. Yeah.
It's interesting also that you speak very much in terms of a kind of personal history. So that's something that an artist might do. It's something that we associate more with an artist than perhaps an architect. Like, architects sometimes, often in culture, is almost expected to kind of step out of their body and their world experience and, in a way, I guess, have this pretense of objectivity. But you seem to be quite comfortable with kind of relating certain, again, attitudes to your childhood and your study of art, do you ever think about what your architecture would have been like if you, let's say, didn't move as much as a child, or if you didn't study art?
I don't think I'd be an architect. So I can't even imagine what that would be. It was such a kind of series of progressions that got me to this point that I can't even, like it seems inconceivable somehow that would be the reality. Like I was someone who really was so in the stepping stones that I had to get to this point, and then to be able to then rethink and have the space and the time to be able to do that is just I'm extremely grateful for that. But the idea of being an architect without that sense of imagination that I was lucky to have, the boredom as a child, the space as a child, the parents who just let me kind of sit with something, who gave me that time. Without that, I can't imagine having been given those years to explore what it is that I found so exciting and so kind of so curious about architecture. And so although I did grow up in a house with developers, so it was just natural to be in that setting as well. So I think I was pulling away from doing that, but I found a way in it that I was excited, that was my own in so many ways. So without all of that, I think it would feel maybe like I don't know, maybe more like a business or more like a...
Yeah, but I guess that's interesting, because then we arrive to business, because what you have now is a practice that is a business. And so then I wonder, how does that sensibility translate to a business? Where I guess in a professional environment, when you say I'm an architect, that comes with it comes with a to-do list, or with a kind of certain a list of services that you're almost supposed to provide. How do you then, within that definition of an architect in business terms, create that space for like exploration or freedom?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really interesting one, because although I have my own kind of approach, I think that I'm also very aware of the client and the collaborators and like their value and their role that they play within their own work. Like I want to create space that they love, space that they'll enjoy for generations. Like it's not, it's definitely not all about me at all. But within that as well, I think that I do create a framework that allows for very slow architecture. And I guess in so many ways I'm really lucky, but I'm also quite determined that stays like that, because I see so much value in that. I see value in slowing down the pace, in creating a world where we are doing the right thing for the right situation. And yeah, I guess I also see the lack of value of speed in so many ways. So that really determines who I work with and how I work straight away. And it's not that I don't work with speed. I do sometimes do very fast projects, but they have probably had a lot of time before the point of construction, or the point of maybe being at the final stages of development. Or they've been ideas that I've kind of like dwelled on for years, and then they come out and they're like a quick test. But in terms of maybe working with like clients or collaborators, I think a lot of it is about I try and reduce that pace on purpose, so that I allow myself a certain way of working and a certain time frame, so I can do the best work for them, I think. And also so that they have time to reflect on what's important for them. I think that's essential, because I think that a lot of people want to just create something. They're like, they've got an idea, they want to change it, let's go for it. And I like to kind of, in a way, force them to take a step back, to rethink the brief, to challenge the brief, see what resonates, and then then I think they're grateful for it in the end because it means that they're much more sure about what they get.
It's interesting, but it also sounds like it's hard, no? Because as a young architect, you almost need to please clients very quickly, and it's almost luxury to be able to do that. I mean, it's something that, let's say, Zumthor is very known for, that he takes very, very carefully chosen projects. But then to be in that position is in itself like a little miracle. So, I wonder, I don't want to ask do you have loads of work, or what's your biggest project, or where's the money coming in from to kind of sustain a practice. But I wonder, what are other things that sustain you in this kind of process of building a practice? Because you're also a young architect, you're also let's say, I don't know whether you see yourself in this space of emerging architects, but it is a space that is quite challenging to occupy. So I just wonder, how do you then balance all of those moving parts?
No, it is. I mean, I am an entrepreneur in so many ways. It is a business. I need to, survive, and I want to survive doing this. So I think that's an important question. I don't think there's just one route. I don't work in only one route. I build a lot of small practices, but I also do a lot of kind of projects that I get paid very little for, but I just love and I spend a lot of time on. I do residencies or research projects. I'm doing a book at the moment, an exhibition for that. So there's definitely there's parts of the practice that earn more than others, but I feel like they all have the same value in terms of how much I give to them. That's probably a terrible business plan, but I think that as long as it's ticking and it's interesting, and I feel like as long as there's value in that, I will continue doing it. I'd much prefer to do the projects that I love rather than spend a lot of time doing projects that I'm not that interested in. So I think that it's a very conscious choice of where I put my time and energy. And I think, of course, within that as well, I have other work that kind of holds the practice. I teach. I used to teach more than I do now. Now I only teach with the AA. But that's a huge support, having that. So 2 days a week, having that kind of basis to know that the rest of the time can be spent in the way that that's really going to then feed into the teaching, but also back into practice as well.
It goes back to what you were saying about art. I guess lots of artists that I know do that. That is quite a common way of sustaining an artistic practice. But it sounds like we as young architects, I guess maybe there is less competitions. In fact, I don't know. I don't know the latest competition I've heard of, and that is something that sustains so much of young architectural practices, or at least launched architectural practices in the past. And now there's so much less of that, and so it's almost like we might need to rethink the way we operate and maybe borrow from, in some way, more precarious work practices such as artists, but to allow us to actually explore and think and come up with other ways of practicing or seeing projects in different things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think there's something interesting about the image of the architect that always wants to grow and always wants to build and build a lot, no? And there's this sense of, what is your legacy as an architect? This idea of yes, it will happen when you're later in life, but there's an importance in that. I don't have the same mindset at all. I've never necessarily wanted to grow as a practice in terms of scale, in terms of projects being bigger, or in terms of the amount of people that are working with me. I don't see that necessarily as of value, but I also but I think also I don't necessarily need to build as well. have the ideas or to exist in the space of architecture, which is so wonderful how varied it is, no? The world of creating space or thinking about space or what is space, you know, I mean that's so varied and broad. And so therefore, you know, you can be working on a publication, and you can, as much as working on an exhibition, or as much as, you know, doing a project for a client, and they all have, I think, a really important role within what architecture is today, and, you know, what it can be. But yes, there is a lack of opportunity, I think, for young architects. You know, there's not that many competitions. The competitions you do, like most people do, they're great platforms for something else, you know. There's some wonderful groups in London that kind of really kind of push or support like younger practices, but I think that they're not sort of large kind of infrastructures or kind of institutions. They're very much like small testing grounds that you can then maybe open doors to kind of discuss and kind of kind of expose your work or ideas.
No, I remember having these conversations with, a while ago, probably conversation with Andreas Lang, that is on the website, and you're just reminding me of that, who talked about how artists have, because of the precarious nature of their practice, that there has to be an infrastructure to support them, such as an infrastructure of residencies, of open calls, of funding streams, and so on. But perhaps because we are a profession, like a professionally regulated field, you know, literally defined in law, like there is a legal definition of what an architect is, we almost are with that drawn into this space of a kind of conventional forms of practice. Whereas what's interesting in what you're saying is that you are actively looking out for kind of less conventional forms in which you can practice. And one of which is, for instance, the residency at the Royal Academy, which was a research project. So maybe we can talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, because I think since doing that residency, I've been sort of thinking about doing more residencies. And that's something that, as in the architecture world, aren't that available, but in the art world is very common. So yeah, that was an incredible opportunity, because it was the Royal Academy who had set up the Royal Academy Architecture Department, which no longer exists, sadly, sort of set up this residency to kind of celebrate René Gelustier, who's a French architect. And so every year they would give an RA prize, and they set up the residency following that. And this only happened for 2 years running, so as you know. But like that was really wonderful, because it was an open call, and it just spoke to me, because it was a French-British kind of collaboration. So
and if we go back, you actually grew up in France.
So growing up in France, it was really nice, this idea of sort of going back to France for a certain period of time to do research, and then creating, I think, this sort of, in a way, a diplomatic kind of conversation between Europe and the UK, and what that started to mean a few years ago and after Brexit, etc. And so I thought it was a really kind of interesting kind of space to be in, especially talking with the British Council of France, and then how that worked with different institutions around Paris that hold her work, but also then I think just getting to know her as an architect. So what does it mean to sort of really observe and start to translate someone's work, and looking at
an architect who maybe is not in kind of aesthetic terms so linked to the work you do, but surely then there is an impact of that closer observation on your practice.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, on first sight, I definitely, I wasn't sure. I didn't know her work particularly well. I didn't really know of her or, her values. But I think that those 6 weeks in Paris, like, to be able to sort of explore all of her body of work, which was a lot, really, in the peripheries of Paris, a lot in her lifetime, and to be able to sort of see not only the chronology of her practice, but also, I think, her intrinsic kind of collective values was just fascinating. So I think that my artwork before my architecture work was, very much speaking to how we live collectively. What does it mean to sort of like challenge, I think, or be an activist within the space of different groups. And then I think that she does that with social housing in an incredibly powerful way. So just the projects that she got given and how she then applied, I think, her design to them was extremely brave in itself, very radical. So she believes that everyone should have a space to live that's completely unique. That in itself, to think about social housing, to be able to design something for every single individual, obviously not for a specific person, but like design a series of spaces that are entirely particulier, you say in French, was really fascinating, because I think that that really drove complexity. I mean, it's really hard to design like 800 units that are all completely different in one site. That and her sense of ecology as well. Like, I mean, everything is extremely she's
overgrown.
She's very conscious of having terraces and gardens. It was all about sort of having your own home, even if you're on like the 4th or 5th floor. So what I really took from that was this idea of you create a skeleton as a designer of whatever that might be, and then within that you just let things grow, you let life happen. And the freedom that she gave, I think, to the users of her site was just, I think, so powerful. And I've not seen that in the same way anywhere else. So it's not necessarily that she uses concrete, it's not necessarily the form, but it's those principles that she kind of...
attitudes.
The attitude that she starts with, which is just so, I mean, very socialist. She was a communist after May 68, and, those projects came about in, very socialist areas, red areas. So that was intrinsic to, I think, so much of the brief and so much of her clients, but still the fact that she pushed that and she applied it, and still to this day, they're all still social housing, really wonderful spaces.
I guess what's in what you're saying is interesting, because that is a kind of influence that perhaps will, and then as you say, like maybe in 10 years and 20 years, you'll reflect on how that has actually maybe influenced your practice, or like in a floor plan of a project or something like that. But I wonder if there are influences that we can now see already in your work. I was very fortunate to have seen your project in France earlier this year, and I just felt like there was almost like a Jadian sensibility that is at the same time kind of rethought and challenged with this like really deep green reflective color, which is really beautiful. So I just wonder, I don't know, like I have a kind of a sense that I can see Donald Judd, let's say, in some of the work that I've encountered, but then there are other works where perhaps that's not at all like there, like the Air and Stone project, which was a 2 or 3 day installation. So I just wonder what are the influences that you draw from in the work that we see?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't, like I said, I don't see it formally. Like, yes, I can see the reference formally, like Donald Judd, in so many ways, in terms of like the kind of the quality of craftsmanship, the lack of hinges, the kind of the disappearance of how of maybe the functionalism of it in so many ways. But the starting point is often the experience that you'll have with that space. So in the example of South of France resident apartment, you get the initial kind of starting point was actually being in the deep green sea of the Mediterranean and wanting to kind of place that within the space, basically at a higher level, but also in some ways open up the view, which is this incredible blue line. So you have this kind of contrasting of being under and being over, and like kind of expanding the horizon within the site. And how to get that depth was something we worked on, I mean, from like over a year at least, with like constant.
And you mean the depth of reflection and color?
Yeah, the depth of reflection and color, but not only that, but also the blur of the reflection, which I think as a starting point we thought, this is going to be quite easy, and it was incredibly hard because I think we actually got a sample that was sort of a mistake, but it really worked. But then obviously when you change contractor and you start kind of developing the design, like actually that was something when you wanted to do it properly and spray it in a certain way and get the depth, but also see the grain of the timber below, see the lines of kind of connection. That took, I think we had at least about 50 samples for that in order to get the right one. And so that journey of, in a way, trying to find the experience was really like, it was so nice when it all came together. It was just such a joy to see that, it kind of works, because you never quite know until something's finished. I mean, you can try it out in model, which we do. We work a lot with models, but of course the reflection in a model, at 1 to 50 or 1 to 20 is never going to be quite the same with the real light, changing throughout the day and coming in from different points. And you don't think about, when the person opens the door at that point, then what will happen with the kind of the three-way reflections. But it's the experience, it's the painterly experience. So it was about kind of creating a painting in so many ways, and what that means to be in that painting. And the references are more like a Rothko or even maybe like a James Turrell playing with light. So those are maybe more the starting point, in the sense of being in an impressionist painting, that something doesn't quite feel ever the same, and the light is never quite as you see it, because it's constantly shifting and changing. So the result might, of course, formally be something, and the angles being very directional, and kind of the orientation being very specific to the location, and to obviously function as well. Like making sure the bathroom stays in the same position, because otherwise it's too much work to move, or reducing the footprint too much would mean that you'd lose a bedroom. There's so many formal decisions as well, but really the ambition was to have that experience.
And if you compare that to the project Air and Stone, which is a sort of a 3-day installation in Clerkenwell, I mean, that looks like it comes from a completely different set of references, perhaps. Are they similar, those two projects?
The reference point is completely different, I'd say. I mean, that came from, I think, an ambition for the site to be connected from 2 different points, basically. So Clerkenwell Design Week happens at various different parts of Clerkenwell, and this space that we were given, which is Clerkenwell Close, what's wonderful about it is the fact that it's quite large. So you have space to kind of play. It has these incredible plane trees, which are kind of, in some ways, kind of the columns of this kind of open square, and then it's framed by these beautiful kind of historical walls, which are actually on both sides are architects behind the closed doors, architectural practices on closed doors. So that the initial starting point was, we need something to be seen from these 2 points so that people will come. So it was, in a way, I guess you could call it marketing, you could call it like promotion, whatever it was.
A piece of propaganda.
A piece of propaganda floating in the air.
Yeah.
So that was the starting point, but obviously not the ambition. And we had very little money and a lot of time to plan it, but not much time to kind of construct it. So Air just seemed like a good starting point. Like, we can create something big that's got quite a lot of impact, that will provide a shelter, and that will hopefully create a civic space that people will sit and use and share, which I think is an ambition I've always had. Like, I like the idea of creating what we might call civic space, whatever that is to this day and age, or a space where we can share and collectively come together and discuss. The square, in London, which which is dying in some ways.
And it's often exclusive and
Exactly.
private. Yeah.
And this, this idea of a kind of a close where you walk through, suddenly being able to pause and stop felt like a nice starting point. But I think a lot of it was actually how you would see the light. So maybe it's back to light again. That's true. So you'd see through, like maybe the greenery. You'd experience the air in a different way, and then you'd see how heavy the ground was with these stones holding it down, holding the force of those 3 tons potentially that could take it. So, but once again as well, it's using the site, it's using the trees, it's not bringing an extra structure. I mean, we went through so many iterations of having structure, not having structure, how we could. So that reduction of matter seemed important in so many ways, and I think the effect in some ways is similar. No, you have like this blur or this ambiguity, and of course we referenced incredible kind of artists such as I want to say Graham Stevens.
I mean, it's interesting that project has this component of civicness, kind of commonality within itself. And I think somewhere where maybe this conversation started, and I'd like to maybe go back to that a little bit, is this question of education. And you mentioned that a big part of what you do is teach. And so I then wonder how, let's say, teaching is also a project, because in a way we spoke about how maybe a bit of research is a project, how project is a project. And then I wonder maybe another element to this is teaching or pedagogy also as a project. And we studied together and we taught together, but we also studied together. And often when I speak to my peers, I like to ask about how much in your approach to teaching you are actually maybe in some ways correcting the mistakes of your teachers, because I do think that's our duty, as well as bring our own I don't really want to say ideology, but bring our own ideas about what education is and what it means to teach. So I guess maybe we can start by reflecting on your own education and reflecting on your pedagogy. What are those things that you're trying to correct from your teachers?
I don't know if I'd say correct, I'd maybe say evolve from my own education. But I can see the reflection on the binary kind of quality of like your own education is helpful as a starting point. But
mainly because I feel like sometimes we perpetuate approaches or we perpetuate ways of the past, whereas they do need to evolve, as you say. Yeah.
No, I think we start off in life questioning our own parents' decisions, and it's similar in education. We with hindsight and with distance, we can then kind of reflect on how we were taught and what we were taught, and what that starts to mean, I think, in our or how it impacted us now. And I mean, my architecture education was so different from my art education. It was obviously like in art, you choose to go forward to have conversations. A lot of it is self-initiated. You have to be extremely driven in a very independent way, and you form your own practice through the conversations you choose to have. In architecture, there's so much more structure in education. Your initial decision of who you're going to be taught by carries throughout the year. And of course, you have other core studies and whatever else.
Well, in schools like UCL or AA or... Yeah,
so I studied at UCL, my undergraduate, and then I came to the AA, and which was really wonderful to have the mix of two schools. I think I could then reflect on it in in a much more mature way, I think, rather than ever maybe had that continuity of one school. And, you know, I was taught rigor. I was taught how to know what I want within a design or within my own work. And I think I was taught about production. You know, I think production was key.
As opposed to your art education.
Completely opposed to my art education, whereas I spend weeks thinking about something and then I might produce one thing. Whereas the kind of the constant act of making and not necessarily making physically, but as in like making sure that something was redrawn and, you know, something's on paper or like kind of, you know, whether it, and thinking it through. The thing, whereas actually at the EA was very much the opposite. It was actually about having agency, becoming, having a voice, I think, creating an agenda and having opinion within that, which I thought was, you know, a really wonderful mix because I'd learned how to design quite well at the Bartlett, well, however well, but I think that was a good lesson. And then I think coming to the EA, I really kind of learned to become myself as a person and, you know, within a world of architecture and who I wanted to be within that was really questioned. And, you know, I think my tutor, Carlos Villanueva-Brandt, was really wonderful at that. Like he gave you a lot of space, but a lot of, I want to say power, but like that's not quite the word, but strength within, I think, what it is that you felt important to explore. And that's been an incredibly strong lesson or valuable lesson, and which I think has given me potentially the kind of the ambition to kind of set out on my own and kind of feel like I could teach and whatever else. So I think that's been a really good lesson. And I think within that, like now, the kind of focus on, you know, there's of course important kind of questions about architecture. What is architecture today? What will it be tomorrow? How are we architects that, you know, have a strong position within the world that actually can maybe make a difference within a positive difference? So those are, I think, really important conversations to have, which I don't necessarily remember having in undergraduate. So I think that that's something I definitely try and push. And I think there's a sense of care and duty that we have as not only architects within the world, but also as teachers, you know, to very young, you know, generally like we're teaching second or third year, they're like, 19, 20, I mean, they might be older if they're coming to the year, like a later stage in their life. But it's such an important time in their life. And so I'm very aware of kind of like the care that we show them and the conversations being very open, but also kind of like allowing the methodology to kind of work with them and at their own pace as well. And so something that, like a few things that I think are really important is basically like maybe allowing them just to sit still in things, you know, like allowing them to kind of accept that it's okay to just like, you know, sit with something, observe it in detail, question it, but, you know, not worry too much about the kind of that need of translation straight away, which is because you notice that they're eager, you know, and which is really wonderful. There's so much energy, but there's also kind of like everything's going so fast. There's so much information in the world that we live in. So actually just allowing yourself to sit with that is really important. And another one, which I think that I didn't necessarily feel that I got, or that I got at least comfort with, was this sense of being okay in the uncertainty, like being okay sitting with something and testing it and trying it out, and it's okay that it falls apart, like, you know, just try again. And I think that was something that I didn't quite get, like, and I think that's really important for them to know and for them to sit with as well. And because, you know, I think that in this day and age as well, there's a kind of sense of you want to know what the end is, you want to know what the outcome is, you want to know that everything's going to be okay. And it's like, it's okay, like just, it's okay that it's not necessarily okay. Like, I think there's a lot of psychology that goes into teaching basically. And I think that that's yeah, that's something that I think we bring into our methodology.
I mean, we're so lucky. I was talking to Sarah Whiting, the dean at Harvard Graduate School of Design, and we were talking about how lucky we are to have these year-long briefs where students stay with us the whole year, and they're able to really be in that space of not knowing, but fairly comfortable. I mean, they don't ever seem to be quite enjoying it. But
depends on the moment.
But it's still a space that's afforded and that is provided and that's there. Whereas I think in American education, it's usually term-based, if not even more frequent. I think the real importance of that space it interestingly goes back to what you were saying about your art education as well. The space for kind of just wandering.
Yeah, being bored, not knowing. Yeah, wandering, observing.
Do we build those spaces? Do we create them, or do they just happen? Does it take effort to be in that space from a point of view of a teacher?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a skill that you build. I mean, some people have it or they've learned at a young age, but I think if you haven't, it's definitely something you can learn. You can learn to be creative. You can learn to sit within, sit still. I mean, it's a Buddhist meditation approach, no? Like, as in how to sit and become unconscious.
Okay, I think this is really interesting what you say about learning. You think you can learn to be creative. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we do as architectural tutors.
Educators.
Educators, yeah. I mean, some people intuitively have more imagination or creativity potentially that, is maybe developed at a younger age, or that potentially they feel they're maybe referencing, looking at different references and applying it and like testing it, and so therefore maybe their language has evolved faster. And there are others who maybe have a more rational approach, or maybe a kind of functional kind of take on what architecture is. And then within that, like, obviously, like, depending on the brief that they might choose, but like, let's say if they came into our unit, like, I think a lot of it is about opening up different possibilities, different ways of seeing the world and different ways of maybe seeing their own potential. And I think within that, yes, I mean, if you're given a series of tasks to kind of really observe a few pieces of artwork or a few buildings, then I think straight away within that, you're forcing yourself to come out of a comfort zone that you might just think that maybe, okay, it's just functionality in this plan that's important. It's actually not, like, oh, what about the light? What about this moment of entry, this threshold? What about this space that doesn't seem to have a function? What does that mean? So you start to question. And then I think through that questioning, you automatically then, like, progressively through practice, through like continued repetition, that starts to, I think, become more intrinsic, and then it's a skill that's developed. So that as a starting point, I would say that already, you become more creative. I mean, the more exhibitions you visit, the more you become exposed to culture in a different way. Like, that's already, you're becoming hopefully the self that you want to be. No, I mean, that's. Yeah.
I mean, that's really interesting, because I remember seeing, let's say, masterclass, the channel that you, and it said at some point, Anna Wintour will teach you creativity, and I thought, oh my God, that's really bad. Like, you can't possibly teach creativity. But I guess
why not? Why do you not think you can teach it?
Well, it's just always to me sounded as if it's a very inherent thing, but I understand. I mean, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and maybe one thing that I can relate it to in your practice is the kind of importance of models, and maybe it also connects to what you teach and how you teach. But maybe for a moment we could just explore the importance of model. Does that have anything to do with kind of articulating creativity or this process of being creative? What is a model for you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a model is usually a sketch. Like it's something that you're testing or you're trying or you're seeing if something fits, you know? Like, and I think that what's wonderful about a model is there's not really a right or wrong. There's not really a way in. Like, there's not necessarily even a starting point. Like, as in, it can be anything or nothing in so many ways. But the way that I see models is the fact that they are a tool for opening up that imagination, but also for learning. Like, they're a way of just kind of getting in touch with your hands, feeling materials, kind of placing. I mean, a lot of what I feel that we do in practice, and the way that maybe also comes across in teaching, is actually how do you start curating? You're not really designing in so many ways. You're placing things to see if they work. Like, you're allowing yourself just to test and try and move. And yeah, it's sort of in so many ways like a kind of choreography of different placements and potential possibilities. And I think within that, unexpected moments come, and then also like potential gems like appear. But I think the making means that you're acting with your body and mind. So it's a consciousness as much as like a kind of a process of action. And I think that means that you are you're working with your intuition, but you're also allowing yourself to see it in 3D. I think a lot of the time I found anyway in the past that, you know, I'm trying things out in plan, but I'm not really thinking in section. And so I think that the model allows you to automatically just kind of be able to kind of transfer like what you're sketching to a model to then to that could be a space. So, you know, so obviously playing with scale, something could be like much bigger than you're actually making the model of, or you can start to think of it as an object rather than as a space. And you know, you've just got so much freedom within your imagination to play with different perspectives and yeah, I think it's just such a rich tool. I actually don't really understand architects that don't work with models. I just can't even understand how you can create space without kind of potentially seeing it. I mean, I do understand it, but it's like I wonder what that would mean. You have to have such a leap of faith if you haven't tested it. You know what I mean? Because I think a lot of the time there's a sense of models as representation, and I don't see the model as that at all. You know, I mean, yes, you might do one for a client, sort of like that builds up and changes, but I see it as a constant change and like just, you know, get rid of it and start again, or remove something and break it, and which I really like. I really like that kind of lack of care in so many ways of it, that you can just kind of destroy it and it's okay, and rethink.
I had a real moment of kind of understanding that when I bought this series of books of Zumthor's monographs. I think I told you this.
Yeah, good.
And there was there was a model of the secular retreat, the Devon project, in that book, which was actually just like a series of stones placed on this kind of landscape. It very much looked like the reference to Stonehenge, perhaps, was like very clear.
Yeah.
But it's amazing that would have been the initial intuition that then transformed into something that's a lot more, I guess, refined as a piece of architecture, which is the building that we see today. So are there any architects that you particularly admire in terms of how they use models? I
mean, yeah, so many architects. I love the way they make models. It's just that I'm seeing the end result. Like, and I think their models are really wonderful. But I rarely see the process of that model, which I find more fascinating. So the back of house, you know, of that state. So that's what's really wonderful about Zumthor, is the fact that he translates that model and it's gone through such a journey following that. I mean, that might have been for him maybe a final model, and then it's just that the project evolved. Like, you know, I guess not knowing specifically the details of that project. But what I think I often reference more artists in the way that the models made. Like Fischli and Weiss would be a major reference of how you can potentially find ways that things are exploding or changing, or in the way things go, like this idea of a kind of cause and effect, and the model itself feels like that, like as if it's going through a procession of like a ritual of change that hasn't really got quite an end, but it will stop at some point because it has to, and then it might come back into another project and and become something else. But I think there's the immateriality to it as much as the materiality, or the absence of something as much as the physical presence of it as well. So the spaces in between or the spaces around it become as important in some ways as what's there. And so I don't know how much, I haven't thought about this as much as I could have, but like I think that within that journey, I guess you never really see that in practice, and that's what I long for.
Well, I guess that says something about the way architecture is mediated, projected to the world.
True, and I don't show it either. Like, so that totally makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, we being the producers and consumers of that kind of mediated architecture, and I mean, that's why I thought that bit of the monograph was really powerful. And in fact, I think it partially was there because the project hadn't been completed at the time that the book was published. So even the plans weren't quite the final plans, I don't think.
Because it took like 10 years, right?
Yeah, it took a long time to make. So maybe then, so maybe if the building had been finished, maybe we wouldn't have seen that model. So it's interesting that you say that. I mean, maybe just my final question would be to do with, I guess, the importance of environment in your work. I mean, you often talk about this, and you spoke about it at the lecture you gave at the Barbican and at the Royal Academy as well. And so I just wonder how you think, how does environmental consciousness, sustainability come into your work? There are architects like, Amin Taha, who, again, he came and was there, a critic for our students, who was just running through potential numbers of cubic meters of carbon that the project would. Yeah. And I was just like, wow, okay, this is like, that's another kind of level, or another, again, maybe this word approach is quite useful to sustainability, but I don't ever hear you talk in those terms, and I just wonder how do you actually think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the work that they've done is really wonderful. No, the stonemasonry company, Amin Taha, and then Webb Yates. Like, I think the three of them have really carried a conversation about sort of structural stone, which I think is so important in this day and age. But I mean that. Yeah, I think just being environmentally conscious is sort of very much a starting point, and I think something that is important within our teaching as much as within practice. So whether that's sort of down to a material consciousness of how we approach, straight away rethinking stone rather than concrete, or concrete blocks, or whatever it would be, that a structural kind of base. To questioning, I think, sustainable timber. We generally only work with natural materials. That's really important for us. But I think it's more strategic. Like, it's how we think long term. It's not necessarily about only what we build with. It's like, how can this be reappropriated, reused, in 12, 10, 20, 30, whatever, long term, in terms of the years to come. Because, I think champions of reuse being like a Versal, or, this kind of like, rethinking what reappropriation is, and how we kind of like can do small iterations or alterations to kind of reapply, I think, function. That seems extremely valuable in this day and age that we live in. But at the same time, I think the first step is just being aware of what we do, of the impact we have, of how much a presence I think we have as architects or as builders within the planet. But also, I think, kind of being more aware of the ground and of the ecology that we sit within. And that it's true that we're not scientists at all, but we do approach it in terms of every specific project and how that can be a really important or valuable kind of part of the project. I think it's impossible not to be like sustainable or have a sustainable kind of approach in the world that we live in now, like as architects. Like it's not even really a conversation, it's just like it's a part of, I think, what we have to do and who we are. And so I think that's the starting point, but it's not it's only a small blip in what we could do, and there's some incredible practices that really focus on that.
I mean, I'm thinking of your project, the photography studio, small project where you use these 2 big blocks of stone.
3 blocks of stone.
3 blocks of stone to support the structure. In a kind of very small little project. I thought that was quite remarkable commitment.
Yeah, I think as practice we do have a commitment to considering how we can influence clients to be more aware, and as much as we can alter, to be able to alter that in a positive. We've worked quite a lot with stone in terms of like we did a residency in Cyprus, kind of considering actually like bringing back a lot of the kind of soft stone and how we could structurally use that within the site, which has been entirely developed in concrete in the last 40-50 years, and looking back is an important thing for us. So how we think about like looking back at history, looking back at different vernaculars, learning from them and reapplying, I think, incredible lessons which we've just forgotten. I have no idea how we've just forgotten them, but they're just that's the interesting thing about structural stone. I mean, it's common knowledge that that's how we used to build, and of course they've done wonderful. There's a wonderful kind of like way of reappropriating or reconsidering how they can apply technology to that, to create even stronger kind of tension structures. But at the same time, like there's still so much potential in just the basics of like using those materials, and the impact is so little in comparison to any production of material. So as a starting point, like we've replaced pretty much as we can, or proposed quite a lot of different structures of larger towers or houses in that as well, and we've also tested how we can think about colouring them or changing them or very, very slightly, but actually I think just showing the possibilities of the material. But so in that project, I mean, the client was determined to have concrete, and that was a process of changing her mind and just going, actually, look how beautiful this is. Why would you want concrete? I mean, the only problem is the cost was higher, sadly, and so, and also the implications of, the regulations don't quite match, like using stone compared to using concrete. So actually it was a lot of work just to get those 3 columns, but in the end I think it's worth it, because